But Mr. Sorabji, I'm sure you agree. Let me actually take this to Mr. Harish Salve. When I say what is private and what is not, I am not trying to find out which joint secretary in which ministry in the government likes or doesn't like Swiss chocolates. I am trying to find out who wrote what on which file and whether the determination of that. You see, Prime Minister has said 4 things. 1, it takes too many people. It's too expensive. It's cumbersome. Indirectly. Secondly, privacy is violated. Thirdly, he says broadly, deliberative processes of the government. In other words, the interaction between top ministers, the interaction between a minister and the Prime Minister's office can be construed, can't it, Mr. Salve, as part of the deliberative processes of government which need not be disclosed. That's the danger.
Now,
I am answering that straight away.
I agree with him. For example, national security, military movements, except that narrow field, except everything should be revealed, except that matters which impinge on national security.
But that's already there. Movements. That's already there in the RTI. Well, Mr. Salve is responding to you.
That's fine.
Mr. Salve, the problem is this. The problem is this. You can have a content-driven exclusion.
Okay.
If we are discussing national security, please don't disclose it. If we are discussing foreign relations, please do not disclose it.
Yes.
You know, areas of sensitivity where there is need for secrecy, not to protect wrongdoing, but to protect larger national interests. But that is content-driven.
Correct.
I have a big problem with the argument that the deliberative process of a democratic government should be in wraps. I have a conceptual problem. If in courts everything has to be in public, it's about time that everything in government offices also is open in public. I mean, you are not saying you live telecast a discussion. All you're saying is whatever is minuted should be available to people. And we must know how different functionaries took a view on a matter of public interest. So I don't see this process-driven exclusion as having any real merit. And as far as the cost of running this act is concerned, are we saying democracy has become too expensive in India?
Well,
I think the focus should be on trying to make sure that our plan expenditure, more than 15 paisa in the rupee, is filtered down, and so we save some resources for running our democracy.
So I don't think this is about privacy, is it, Mr. J? Because, you know, I won't name the leader, but I must say that there is a clause of 8J in this, you know, which deals with this issue, and without naming the person, I can say that information was sought under the RTI on very, very important political leaders, on the private affairs of political leaders. You know, but that was denied, saying it violates that individual's privacy. So I'm not understanding the root of this argument, Mr. Jethmalani, right? Mr. Jethmalani? Are you in agreement with?
There are, you know, I'll tell you, Arnav, there are 2 themes in the Prime Minister's speech. One is protection from public disclosure of what is exclusively in the private sphere. The exemption clause, section 8, which you mentioned, has a specific exemption clause saying that private acts, private communications, private conduct, which in sum and substance don't resound in the public domain or don't impinge on public interest. These are protected from disclosure. So, and you know, you can't have a specific exact definition of which kind of kinds of acts and communications will come in that category. That's best left to the interpretive processes of the court. The second theme in the Prime Minister's speech is far more worrying, which is what again Harish just touched upon, and that is to say that disclosure of the kind that is taking place is detrimental to institutional efficacy. That's the key word. Now, I don't know what the Prime Minister seems to be suggesting from that, because it seems to me that he wants to cap all disclosures in the deliberative process of the government. Is that his intent? Is he saying from now on there will be a complete lid on every step of a deliberative process in every government decision? Because that is contrary to the RTI Act. And if he wants to do that, you might as well scrap the whole Act, because it renders it ociose infructuous.
Yes. Why should, Soli Sorabji, why should the government not make public all the public exchanges between all the ministries? As long as it doesn't compromise on national security, people have a right to know.
Yes, but Arnab, I'm in agreement with that. With that exception, I'm in agreement. And I don't buy the argument that the officers will be deterred from frankly giving their opinions. Why? Honest, independent opinions shouldn't be deterred by that. I'm quite with you.
You see, people are also noticing very much, Anjali, that the Congress party seems to think one way on this. And the government seems to think the other way on this. At least that is what appears to be the case, Anjali. I don't know how you're reading the situation, because I know that as recently as November 2009, Sonia Gandhi wrote to the Prime Minister making a strong pitch against any dilution or amendment of the legislation. That, of course, was in the pre-UPA2 scam period. I don't know if things would have changed at all. There is no reason for us to believe it's changed. How are you reading the political pressures, Anjali?
Well, certainly, like I said, the timing is looking very suspect. And I think at a time when corruption issues are really sort of center stage in terms of if they're capturing people's imagination, like we just discussed, we are saying that only 15 paisa out of 1 rupee is actually reaching the intended beneficiaries. I don't think that taking away transparency from the system can be the answer, and it even is something that should be debated. We have a very progressive right to information legislation which has a very well stringently defined exemptions clause which takes care of issues like privacy, national security, etc., and there is adequate space to be able to deny information which people shouldn't have. So I think that in that sense this is a big problem. It's very regressive. In terms of the whole deliberative process and that debate, Arnab, I'd like to say something. See, the problem is that corruption is not just financial.
Yes.
Abuse of power is also corruption, and in fact it's a bigger problem in many cases. And if we actually start saying that deliberations of the government are going to be kept out of the public domain, that's a very, very big problem. We just need to look at the several anti-poor policies that have been coming out from successive governments to be able to say why the poor, why the marginalized, why citizens in general need to know the basis of how decisions are made in the country for them, on behalf of them. And therefore I think that the clause in the exemptions, the clause which states that while the cabinet is making a decision, the papers can be exempt, but once the decision is made, the papers should be made public. People have a right to know the basis on which decisions were taken, and there is really no question of keeping deliberations out of the process.
Which makes it even more difficult to understand, you see, because already the law is exactly the way you want. And Mr. Salve, you know, one of the most bittersweet ironies of all this is that this whole difference of opinion, I mean, at least the Sonia Gandhi staunch disapproval to any amendment to the RTI, it actually came to the fore when through an RTI application. RTI activist Subhash Agarwal obtained copies of the correspondence between Sonia Gandhi and the Prime Minister through an RTI application.
See, Arnab, I want to tell you something. Area of RTI which possibly the layman doesn't know. In court, in so many important cases where the government affidavits lack candor, forget corruption, I'm just talking of good governance. Government affidavits lack candor. I know clients who have written and got papers in RTI and said, sorry, the government is misleading the court. Now, these are not all cases of corruption. It is improving the quality of governance. If a minister writes a letter trying to superimpose his views on a public sector undertaking, I'm not saying he's doing it for corrupt reason. He just thinks he's cleverer than the board of the PSU. I want to know, because I want to know if my PSU set up with my tax money are being given autonomy, or are ministers interfering in their autonomy. Forget corruption, governance. It's all about governance and the citizens' participation in governance. So I think all the exceptions which we need are there in the RTI. In fact, believe me, they are rather widely worded. We have been fortunate to have very powerful chief information commissioners who have leaned in favor of disclosure rather than in favor of secrecy.
Well,
but the clauses are rather widely worded. Now, if you go further than this, God knows what will remain of the law.
So, Soli Sorabji, you know, what is your best advice to the government on this?
There's no point having the law.
What is your best advice to the government on this? Because there seems to be a determined approach. Slowly but surely begin a debate. Maybe tomorrow say we will call different groups, call some groups who are against it, and then start making the changes. What is your advice to the government?
Advisor, don't tinker with the Act, which has proved to be extremely useful for the citizens, as Harish said, not merely a question of corruption, but the quality of governance. If there are some grey areas, like for example decisions, but that's already there, national security and military movements, foreign relations.
They're all there.
If there's
They're all there.
Loopholes there, or some plug there, plug the loophole.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Otherwise, please don't tinker with it. It's been a very beneficial piece of legislation and has yielded salutary results.
Well, I think there is almost I would say 99.9999% consensus on the show and across on all sections that there is no need to tinker with it. Let's see if the government actually takes a step back and reflects upon the merits of what has been said. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. The answer to the question, how much is too much, is simple. When the information is in the public interest, no amount of information is too much. And whether it is in the public interest or not cannot really be determined by one section alone.